it is important to understand that most of what we know about children and adolescents' subjective well-being or well-being comes from the Western world, mainly from high-income countries. So we know little because we have limited data from low-income countries and from countries in many parts of the world, which sadly means that most of the children and young people in this world are not being listened to. We don't have data on their well-being, and those are, in many cases, the children that are most in need. And so we are not listening to children and young people globally because we have this data.
I guess the first thing to talk about is what do we mean by childhood and adolescence? So really childhood could be from conception or birth, right up to usually around age 10 to 12, around puberty. And then adolescence runs from puberty all the way up to age 24 is what we look at in the chapter, because the research really shows now that developmentally, when looking at things like neuroscience and physical development, that adolescence goes to age 24. So we've included 10 to 24 in our data. Across the World Happiness Report, it's looking at subjective well-being, and it's the same for this chapter. So what we really mean by subjective well-being is how the young person feels about their own life. And well-being, same as in the adult research, is split into 3 areas. So that's life satisfaction, affect, and eudaimonia. And really the data that we have access to talks about well-being in adolescence more than childhood. There's more data available for that age range. And really the data that we have access to focuses more on life satisfaction. There is some affect data, but very little on eudaimonia. And in childhood and adolescence, it's slightly different than in adulthood because there's more domain-specific elements within life satisfaction. And I think we can say that we haven't gone into that level of detail in the chapter because the data is just not there internationally. What we have done is take data from 4 international surveys, and these are the only 4 surveys that exist for us to work with. And so we've taken everything that is internationally available where it looks cross-culturally, and that's the PISA survey and HBSC,
Children's Worlds, and Gallup.
And we've taken all of that data together, and what we did was compare what was available to look at wellbeing. And really it was only the life satisfaction element. So we don't look in this chapter at affect and eudaimonia because either they weren't included or they're just not comparable. And the life satisfaction that we look at is measured in slightly different ways in these 4 surveys, but it is comparable. It's with the same scale, it's just slightly different wording of the questions.
The 4 of them use the 0 to 10 scale, 2 of them use the country's ladder, 2 of them use
the general life satisfaction question. Yeah, so really what we're focusing on here is life satisfaction as well-being, which is exactly what they do in the adult chapters as well.
We have a legal obligation to listen to children in all aspects affecting their lives, and asking them about how they feel about their lives is the best way to do that. There is, of course, the normative argument. For a long time, we didn't consider that it was worth it asking children and young people about their well-being. We assumed that childhood and adolescence were not states on their own right, but just a transition to adulthood, and we used to see them from this point of view of well-becomings rather than well-being.
And I guess we've got to also say it's a huge part of someone's life, and sadly some children and adolescents don't make it past that period, so we can't just have childhood and adolescence purely as a period of preparation for adulthood.
Sure. And especially now that we know that what happens in adolescence and well-being in childhood and adolescence has a strong impact in later outcomes in life, in the labor market, educational outcomes, relationships, and everything, and many other aspects. Having said that, however, there is this increasing interest in well-being in children and adolescents because of this evidence that there is a strong link between well-being in adolescence and later outcomes in life. So that's another strong argument. We should be interested in promoting well-being in childhood and adolescence, because that's going to have lifelong positive effects. Another reason is the declining trends that we are seeing over the last 10-15 years in some countries, especially in the Western world. So we should be concerned about these declining trends, and we should be interested in doing something about that.
So what we know is that well-being decreases over the lifespan from childhood down to adolescence and then lower in adulthood. And that's what we've got represented in the data that we have, the same findings. And I guess we can talk a little bit about the trends that we found across that data.
Yes, we've found declining trends following the COVID-19 pandemic in younger adolescents, aged 12 to 15, in most countries that we have data for, but interestingly not in the few East Asian countries that we examined, where apparently life satisfaction has increased following the pandemic. And that is an interesting finding, because it shows that when you get to collect data in other countries, in other parts of the world, you start seeing different patterns, differences across regions, differences across different parts of the world.
When we're looking across global data, if you're just looking at one country in isolation, you don't get a whole global picture. Whereas here we know in Europe, in America, New Zealand, Australia, there are decreases post-pandemic, but that's not seen the same in Asian countries.
Globally, young people still report higher well-being than adults, but things seems to be going up, partly in Western Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. Western Europe, the gap is narrowing, but interestingly, in North America, United States and Canada, and Australia and New Zealand, this gap seems to be reversing due to negative trends among young people, adolescents. And then you look at other parts of the world, and for example, this gap is increasing in Sub-Saharan Africa, because young people in Sub-Saharan Africa are reporting increasingly higher well-being compared to the adult population in that part of the world. So we talked earlier about these negative trends that we are concerned about, but this evidence mostly comes from the Western world and some countries, and then we see that when moving the focus from these constantly surveyed countries and regions to other parts of the world, things start to look a bit different.
These declining trends pop up in actually quite a few different data sets, and we were aware of them before we started bringing these data sets together. So although there are lots of caveats, this I think is probably one of the most interesting findings across this chapter. One important thing to discuss is gender differences, and this example highlights why it's so important to have global data, global representative data from not only high-income countries, which is the majority of the data, but also middle and low-income countries. So what we know historically about life satisfaction is we start to see a gap emerging around puberty, where male life satisfaction is decreasing, but female life satisfaction is decreasing more rapidly through adolescence. But we found some interesting nuances within our data.
Exactly. So those are the findings mostly from high-income countries, as you mentioned. Then when moving to age 15 to 24, using the Gallup data, which includes almost all countries in the world, so a more global sample, we see that then the females report higher life satisfaction than males. So the opposite we see from age 12 to 15.
Really, this chapter has two important purposes. One is to look at those trends and see what's going on with the data that we have available, but also to make a call for more data. So we're seeing these sort of spotlights on these particular areas and research findings, but as researchers, we don't always have access to the data that we need in order to explore those findings. And it's becoming more and more important as we see these declining trends to have access to that data. And these 4 surveys are brilliant, and they go a long way to explaining what's going on, but they don't cover everything.
One of the main things that the chapter shows is the the nuance of the results in terms of levels, trends, and correlates, which differ across age, gender, country, different parts of the world, high-income countries, low-income countries. So, for example, when it comes to gender differences, you see that some of the findings that we come across very often in the literature are not the same when you look at different types of countries or different parts of the world, which speaks again of the data limitations and the importance of having better data from other parts of the world, because what we believe we know about children and adolescents well-being might not apply to these other parts of the world.
It's important to say thank you to the data providers who gave us access to the data for this chapter. We've been really grateful for the support that we've had for people who've also reviewed this chapter, and we've really tried to make sure that all the experts in this area, we're kind of aligned on what we're saying in the chapter. And also, obviously, thanks to our co-authors who aren't sitting with us, because it'd be a lot to have 5 of us sitting here, but thanks to Leonie Boyle, to Wanying Zhou, and to Yan Manuel Deneuve.